What is up? PeteyMac, Greg Ehrenberg with you on a jam-packed Tuesday. This is the MLB Strategy Show here on Awesemo, coming off the holiday weekend. Big plans, big excitement. How was it for you, Greg?
The weather sucked. I worked, but it was cool. I mean, I like doing shows anyway, so it's not like it made a difference to me. But yeah, we've had the weather. We were talking a little bit about this before in New Jersey. It went from temperature in the 90s to all of a sudden it plummeted. It went to 40s, which also, like, there was a tornado in the area last week and it rained a lot and then the temperature came way down, and now it's going to be 90 again later this week. So there we go. Nothing in between, 40 or 90.
Kind of love the swings. I had friends on Long Island and they're watching the air show at Jones Beach and they are dressed in parkas, like winter coats on the beach because it was so cold in New York this weekend. But, that's the way it goes. We got a jam-packed slate, 14 games to talk about tonight as far as Major League Baseball goes. So we'll get into that in just a moment. Of course, get involved in the chat on YouTube. We appreciate that. And we'll make you part of the conversation here. Also, like, subscribe. We appreciate all of that. And remember, if you're not able to watch your favorite Awesemo shows on YouTube, you can always check out the podcasts after the fact. We've got a podcast for every sport available on every major platform. So go to awesemo.com/podcast. Check out the latest. You leave a 5-star review. You leave your Twitter handle or email address. We can track you down, and you're eligible to win a free week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. One winner awarded every Friday, and reviews be eligible to win for up to 1 year. Well, you look at the totality of this thing. There's not a whole lot of aces on the board here, Greg. You do have Tyler Glasnow, who will be the top pitcher on the board by most projections. You have Coors Field in the mix, and thankfully, no weather to really worry about tonight after last week was just such a mess with that. It's like every night it swung based on how you were reading the radar at 6:59.
You know what's funny is, so a slate like tonight, right? We have 14 games, and you would figure there's a ton of pitching options to go to. And then you look at the ownership projections, and we have Robbie Ray is projected to be the most rostered pitcher on both Fanduel and Draftkings by a little bit of a wide margin. 21% is projected ownership on Fanduel, and there's no other pitcher projected over 15%. And then Draftkings, he's projected for 32% ownership when Tyler Glasnow was the only other pitcher projected over 20. So somehow we ended up with a 14-game slate where a very inconsistent Robbie Ray is the most popular play of the day.
This is what we have. So it's a little bit of a messy slate to get into. There's a lot of different areas to go. Obviously, this isn't a, hey, lock in Corbin Burns and run him in 100% of your lineups kind of night. So we'll start with the top projected pitcher, Tyler Glasnow, who has a fabulous matchup with the New York Yankees. Well, we could say that now. In the Yankees, you look at total runs scored this season, only the Detroit Tigers have scored fewer runs amongst American League teams. The Yankees offense is just straight up bad. They have been bad for weeks. They're in the midst of this slump. 41-year-old Rich Hill is shutting them down yesterday, and now they have to deal with Tyler Glasnow. I mean, it seems strange to say, hey, a guy pitching at Yankee Stadium, that's a good matchup, but it is for Glasnow tonight.
Yeah, I mean, the Yankees still have a 97 WRC plus for the season against right-handed pitching, so it's not necessarily the best matchup in the world. However, relative to what expectations would be going up against the Yankees early in the year, it's certainly an easier matchup than we would have expected. The Yankees offense definitely does appear right now to be slightly below average against right-handed pitching. The other thing also, the Yankees, as has been the case with them for the last few years, they're dealing with a whole bunch of injuries. So Tyler Glasnow, to me, is the overall top pitching option on the slate. And the ownership, it somewhat bears that out. I said before, he's the second most rostered pitcher on DraftKings tonight. On FanDuel, maybe a little bit more decision to make because he's priced probably up to 10,700. But Tyler Glasnow at 9,800 on DraftKings, I think that he is the pitcher to have the most exposure to. And in the initial build that I've made for today, Tyler Glasnow is in 40% of my lineups. He's my most rostered pitcher. So I think that he's a pretty high priority play. Even what would appear to be a tough matchup against the Yankees, like you said, it isn't really. And Tyler Glasnow, excellent strikeout stuff. So it's not very often that we see Tyler Glasnow have bad outings. He had one start this year, a couple outings ago, where he got lit up against Toronto. But besides that, he's scored at least 19 DraftKings points in every single outing this year. And you look at the other options on the slate, he's very high priority for me to get to.
Yeah, and again, the Yankees have really struggled here. Giancarlo Stanton had a hot streak for a little while, but came back from the injured list, and he's just off right now. Brett Gardner looks absolutely washed. Rougned Odor, I mean, he's not hitting cleanup anymore. He's down in the 9-hole, but there are so many holes in this Yankees lineup to go after. So we'll see if Tyler Glasnow could take advantage of that tonight. Now, the Rays, they're an offense that strikes out quite a bit as well. Domingo Germán enters with some decent numbers for the Yankees, but the projection's not showing this as a very positive matchup for Germán.
Yeah, so Domingo Germán, he's been a little inconsistent this year, which, maybe that's to be expected when you consider the time off and some of the issues he's dealt with away from the field. And he opened the season by not working all that deep into games. Hasn't been as much of an issue lately. If you look at his last handful of starts, 5 2/3 innings, 7 innings, 6 innings, 6 1/3 innings. So I look at the price on Domingo Germán. It's a little more than I'd like to pay for him going up against the Tampa Bay Rays, and the Rays offense this year has been really good against right-handed pitching. They have a 113 WRC plus. The only teams in baseball with a better WRC plus against right-handed pitching are the Dodgers and the Blue Jays. So it's a brutally difficult matchup. The only reason Domingo Germán gets any sort of consideration from Rays is because there's weak pitching options. He's shown some upside as of late, and he's only 2% projected ownership right now. But Fanduel single pitcher site, wouldn't recommend him. Draftkings, maybe low priority play. Over 2% would be warranted, but if you're playing 5, 10, 20 lineups, I wouldn't even consider Germán at that point. We only have him with a 5% chance of being one of the top 2 pitchers on the slate, so better than what his ownership is, but only marginally.
It's again, this is going to be the focus today. It's just the lack of pitching on this slate. This is the kind of thing that you typically see like the 3rd, 4th day of the season where the aces have already pitched. And you're kind of down to the dreck, and you have a little bit of that happening tonight beyond the Tyler Glasnows. Like that next tier of pitcher is essentially like Michael Pineda going up against the Baltimore Orioles on this night. Bruce Zimmerman making the start for Baltimore, and the over-under, it's interesting for as bad as the pitching is on this slate, the over-unders, you don't have a whole lot, you don't have any in double digits, even with a game at Coors Field. This is actually one of the higher ones at Camden Yards with an over-under of 9 and Pineda on the hill from Minnesota.
Yeah. So, I mean, talking about the pitchers in this game, on the Pineda side to start, he's somebody I've been waiting for regression from for a little while now. And I bring up a lot of the same talking points. I feel like every time he pitches now, and he's gotten hit a little bit harder in recent starts, but still his underlying numbers suggest a much worse pitcher than what he's shown. So he has a 2.62 ERA, but a 4.12 expected ERA, a 4.44 FIP. And then also, if you just look at some of the velocity numbers on him, all the injuries over the years, he's had elbow injuries, he's had a shoulder injury, he's also had a PED suspension. So his velocity since 2016, 94.7, and then the subsequent years, 93.9, 92.6, 92.1, and now 91.3. So you consider somebody who has had all these injuries, the PED suspension, now over the age of 30, the diminished velocity, and then also how lucky he's been getting with his batted balls in play, only a 213 BABIP against him this year, and his career BABIP 296. So certainly expect regression there. There's going to come a point in time where Pineda starts to give up a bunch of runs and gets hit a lot harder than what he's getting hit right now. So Pineda is somebody who I'm continually stacking against and hoping that it's finally going to be the spot where he starts to see some of that regression. I understand Baltimore, not the best offense in the world, and this is, a pretty big slate, but I think Baltimore is at least worth being in the player pool when you consider that we do have him with a 7.8% chance to be the top value stack of the day, and that is the 3rd best of any team on the slate.
They do have a little bit of pop, and the stacks are all pretty even as well. Even with a game at Coors Field, you typically expect that Coors Field game, those teams will be bumped up at the top, but we'll get into that game and why it's playing out a little different as far as what the projections are telling you right now. And then as far as the Twins go, this is the top stack of the day, or projected to be the top stack of the day. Not a whole lot of positive leverage. Everybody is on this. I know, ran my initial build and a ton of Nelson Cruz and Miguel Sano as I'm hunting for homers at Camden Yards. But this Twins offense, I mean, it's got a shot to pop, but everybody seems to be on them.
Yeah, and this is the type of spot that personally I'm almost always going to want to be underweight to the field on. And it's not to say that it isn't a good spot for the Minnesota Twins. We have them with the best odds being the top stack of the day, but this is a 14-game slate. There are 28 teams to choose from, and the Twins are picking up a 16.2% ownership share, and we have a 9.2% chance of them being the top stack of the day. And then you look at some of the individual ownership percentages that are projecting for the top players in the lineup. Josh Donaldson, Miguel Sano, Mitch Garver, Nelson Cruz, All of these guys are projecting north of 20% ownership. And it's not that any of them are just bad plays individually. Certainly, if you play cash games for baseball, you want to play these guys. But in tournaments, when we have 28 teams to choose from, I don't think it's right to say that any of these guys are over 20% likely to be optimal. I don't think Nelson Cruz has a 30% chance to land in the optimal lineup on a 14-game slate. So with that in mind, the Twins are a team that I want to be way underweight to the field on, and all these individual hitters also to me don't make for great plays relative to ownership.
And recent examples, if you're playing this weekend, last night it was a 3-game slate. Then I'll bring up the example last night. So it's kind of an odd one, but Adalberto Mondesi was owned 67% in the tournament I was in because everybody was trying to get low-priced guys to squeeze in Jacob deGrom or Trevor Bauer. And, Gavin Lux ends up being the best shortstop, hitting 2 home runs for the Dodgers. Not a whole lot of people were on him. So sometimes, you could do the little opposite thing. I think Fernando Tatis Jr. was very owned in the daytime slate yesterday. He did hit a home run. On Saturday, the big one was Giancarlo Stanton was in 30% plus of the lineups. And I think he walked maybe twice, and that was about it. So with the hitters, you can get that offer, and even if they do hit a home run, it's not necessarily going to kill you if you have somebody else like what would be if you didn't have Tatis and you ended up with Kyle Farmer on the big slate yesterday, you did just fine.
Yeah, and we even yesterday I had more exposure to Javi Baez than I did to Fernando Tatis just because of my exposure to Cubs stack. So I liked the Padres a little bit yesterday also, but the Cubs were one of the teams that really rated out as being one of the stronger positive leverage scores. And, I ended up on a different lineup construction because Javi Baez also homered, but he was considerably cheaper than Tatis. And it's not to say that any of these guys, bad plays individually. If you're just looking at projection, be like, oh, these guys project for a lot of fantasy points. Because, the Twins have a really high run total for the day, and a lot of people are getting to them. It just, the question becomes, at what point is there the break-even point in terms of ownership? And when do you look at some of these guys and you say that, hey, their odds of landing the optimal lineup don't quite match up with the ownership. And that's really where it is with the Twins.
That's where you can hit. All right, let's get to Robbie Ray, who's going to be one of the most owned pitchers on this night as the Toronto Blue Jays. They are home in Buffalo, no longer in Dunedin. So the ballpark is going to play a little bit differently, probably quite a bit differently. And they go up against Sandy Alcantara and the Miami Marlins. What do you like about Robbie Ray in this spot? He's pitched well as far as Draftkings points, but has allowed 14 homers this year as well.
Yeah, so what I like about Robbie Ray is that the other pitchers on the slate suck. And Robbie Ray is strikeout upside, right? So it's not hard to look at Robbie Ray and just compare him to the other pitchers and say that he is a good option. Now, for me, I think Robbie Ray is picking up too much ownership. So cash games, if you play cash games on Fanduel, I would actually probably still roster Robbie Ray considering what his ownership is right now, because even though I think that Tyler Glasnow is the better option for me personally, for cash games, a lot of times you just want to align yourself with the field. And if Robbie Ray is going to be over 50% owned in cash games, then roster him. Draftkings cash games, play Tyler Glasnow and Robbie Ray together. For tournaments, I suggest what I'm going to be doing is just going underweight to Robbie Ray and stacking against him, just because what you said there I think is pretty important, which is not only has Robbie Ray been a good fantasy pitcher this year, but Robbie Ray, it's not like he's some lights out real life pitcher. Robbie Ray this year, he has a 4.56 expected ERA. Last year, he had a 6.49 expected ERA. He's been a little lucky this year because he only has a 254 BABIP. Historically, he's been somebody with high BABIPs. He had a 310 BABIP last year. And then if you look at his home run to fly ball rate this year, 25.9. So just look at these numbers. The easiest way to get leverage on the field at the way this slate looks, take some shots stacking against Robbie Ray, because he's either going to have a massive fantasy game or he's going to totally suck. And he's going to have like seven runs and 3 homers through 3 innings, because that's Robbie Ray. It's both ends of the spectrum. He's really high variance. So just given where the ownership is, I think it makes more sense to stack against Robbie Ray than to go overweight to him as a pitcher.
So if you're going to look at the Marlins offensively, Jesus Aguilar, generally a guy with a little pop, hits from the opposite side of the plate than Robbie Ray is pitching from. Adam Duvall would be another. I mean, any other Marlins that you really look at and say, I'm going to try to get this guy in there?
Yeah, so I have built some Marlins stacks. I'm just going to pull them up to see which players end up populating. It's not like we look at the Marlins and feel terrific about them as a stack, except more often than not with baseball and looking up ownership, there's a reason the chalk plays end up being the chalk plays and that people gravitate towards certain players. I mean, on paper, you wouldn't look at the Marlins, think of them as the best offense, just an ownership play. But so some of the players that I'm getting to right now, my Marlins stacks, Jazz Chisholm, although we're not really sure if he's actually going to ultimately end up being in the lineup or not. Jesus Aguilar, he's somebody who's a pretty high priority. Starling Marte, he's back in the lineup now. He's somebody that makes sense. Garrett Cooper. But the big three for me that I think have the most upside, and the price is all reasonable here also, is Aguilar, Marte, and a Cooper.
And what I like is you're not necessarily hunting for 16 runs from the Marlins. I get that. That's great, obviously. But you have a pitcher who's home run prone. And if you have, let's say, 5 Marlins on your DraftKings, 4 on Fanduel, if 3 of those guys homer, you're in really good shape. They don't necessarily have to go out and score a bazillion runs for you and have single after single after single.
Yeah, and listen, so Robbie Ray's last 5 starts, he's allowed 2 homers, 2 homers, 3 homers, 1 homer, and 2 homers. Robbie Ray has only gone 1 start the entire season where he didn't allow a home run. The odds of him giving up multiple homers in this game are more likely than him giving up 0 homers. And certainly if we see him struggle, there's so much leverage to be had there. And I mean, the way that he struggles is giving up those long balls. So high variance pitcher, there's certainly upside there, but I think that I prefer the Marlins side given what the ownership is right now.
Remember, you can get access to all the great Awesemo Plus tools and content for nearly every DFS sport out there with an Awesemo Plus weekly pass for $29.95. This will give you full access to all the premium content like we're talking about here. Player projections, ownership projections, so vital as you're trying to take down these tournaments. Our premium Slack channel, lineup builder, and much, much more. And if you're only looking to play MLB DFS, you don't care about basketball, hockey, all the rest, you can sign up for just the Awesemo Plus MLB weekly package for only $15.95. Stop guessing, start winning. Join Awesemo Plus today. And if you want a little free taste, MLB player projections are free at awesemo.com today. The NBA Big Board, NHL player rankings, and PGA top golfers as well. Next up, let's get to the Phillies and the Reds. You know, Aaron Nola, I think of him as an ace, but he really hasn't done it this year. He's only had 2 starts of over 20 DraftKings points so far this season. What do you make of Aaron Nola in this matchup against a Cincinnati Reds team that went kablamo yesterday?
A lot of bad luck so far for Aaron Nola. And it's not like his numbers are terrible for the year. He has a 3.72 ERA, but you look at the underlying numbers, 3.09 expected ERA, 2.97 FIP. So we've got Nola with one of the highest batting average on balls in play of his career at 306. He's always been a guy that limits hard contact pretty well, and that's overall limited the amount of balls in play against him that have led to hits. And I'm just going to pull up some of his batted ball data here to see if, it's not like anything's changed. His hard hit rate's about right in line with his career average. You look at the exit velocity against him on average about the same as his career, 88.4 compared to 87.6. Barrel rate's still fairly low at 6.2%. There's no reason to think that Aaron Nola should be getting this unlucky. And once again, him being unlucky is still 3.72 ERA. So think about the results of him getting this kind of bad luck. Number one, the ERA is a little bit higher, but beyond that also, if more of these weak hit balls are leading to hits against him, it runs up his pitch count. He's not working as deep into games, and therefore we're not seeing as many fantasy points because he's losing out on 1 or 2 innings per start. So all that considered, I think we look at, once again, some of the weaker pitching options on the slate, and that Aaron Nola overall projecting for sub 20% ownership on DraftKings on FanDuel, Nola projecting for 14% ownership. I'd rather pay up for Tyler Glasnow personally, but Aaron Nola is definitely a secondary pay up option that's worth getting to behind Glasnow.
And then Sonny Gray, I had him in some of my initial builds. What do you make of him going up against Philadelphia?
Yeah, so one thing that's nice about him from a FanDuel perspective, 7,700, he's the only guy that to me really makes sense in that price tier. We've got him and Michael Pineda both in that mid 7K range. I certainly prefer Sonny Gray to Pineda. DraftKings, I think that Sonny Gray is viable, but not really a high priority play for me at 8,900 when you consider that we could get to Tyler Glasnow at 9,800. So there's only a $900 price gap between Tyler Glasnow and Sonny Gray. So Sonny Gray, given where he's priced on FanDuel, I think that he's an okay guy to get to. But DraftKings, if he's in your player pool, I don't have an issue with it, but not a priority option.
All right, so let's get to Washington and Atlanta. Steven Strasburg making another start. He's been kind of chalky the last couple of times out. Hasn't put up big numbers because he's been limited. 72 pitches, 87 pitches, his first 2 starts back. So he's building up. You figure if you're going to take a guess, probably around 95 pitches would be his limit tonight. Tough matchup against the Atlanta Braves. So the public isn't on Strasburg today.
Yeah, and one of the other issues here, too, is just the price point. If he was cheaper, I think we'd have some decisions to make, but he's 9,500 on Fanduel. On Draftkings, Strasburg is priced at 8,600. If we were getting some kind of discount that mirrored his actual quality of pitching as of late, then I think we'd say, like, hey, maybe we want to bet on Steven Strasburg getting back to form because of the long track record of him being an elite starting pitcher. But I think there's reason to think he's just not that guy anymore. He has a 4.43 ERA, a 4.94 expected ERA. We know about the long injury history. And if you look at his velocity numbers, he's a guy who had some of the best stuff in the big leagues. He used to have an average fastball velocity of 98 miles per hour, 91.8 last year, 92 this year. It's just not nearly the same that it used to be. And even the last full season we saw from him, where he was still good, maybe not quite the pitcher he used to be, but he was still somebody who was throwing 94, 95 miles per hour. So now we're seeing a 3 to 4 mile per hour velocity dip from him. The results aren't there. The strikeouts certainly aren't there at the same rate anymore. He has a 22.7% strikeout rate this year, 28.9% for his career. So there's a pretty significant drop off in overall arm talent from Steven Strasburg. I definitely think that all these injuries are playing a role in it. And then remember that weird calf injury in spring training where it was like he felt a pop, his calf is torn. They're like, it's no big deal. You just pitch with that.
It's a thing that doesn't matter.
Yeah, they're like, it's a thing
like
that
an appendix.
Matter. Yeah, like no, it's gallbladder surgery. You just get it removed, and then you're good to go. But then why is the velocity so low, right? So the injuries here to me seem to be a factor. And the performance just hasn't been there, and he's getting priced up as if he still is that same Steven Strasburg of old. And then you mentioned also a tough matchup against the loaded Atlanta Braves lineup. So I'd prefer taking the Braves side of the game, although they are also a little bit popular. So it does look like the field is hip to the fact that Steven Strasburg is on the decline. And
then Max Fried, I mean, he's kind of a similar situation, has been banged up this year, hasn't gone over 95 pitches all season. Last time out did go 7 innings, but only 2 strikeouts against the Pirates. There's just not enough upside there.
Yeah, it's funny with Max Fried because for a really long time, I was chasing his season from last year and thinking like, all right, this will be the Max Fried start. This will be the Max Fried start. And I've never been on the right side of Max Fried. Even then, when I was like, all right, maybe the numbers just aren't there. It's time to stack against Max Fried. It was like the one lights out start he's had the entire season. So I've had
he's the Steven Matz of the Braves.
No, I've been on the good side of Steven Matz. That dude just stinks. But Max Fried is, to me, a pitcher who's really hard to get a read on. Also, 7,500 now on DraftKings, and on FanDuel, Fried is priced at 8,800. So at least earlier in the year when we were contemplating whether to play Max Fried or not, it was like he was 6,200 against the Miami Marlins, and it made a whole lot of sense. Now he's more expensive than that. It's a tough matchup against the Nationals. Even with the weaker pitching options, other guys I'd rather get to.
Let's get to the Tigers. They're always a team that you got to at least consider the pitcher going up against them every single day. Eric Lauer will have the honor for the Milwaukee Brewers today. Matthew Boyd on the hill for the Tigers. Is Eric Lauer even a consideration based on the fact that simply he's going up against the Tigers?
It's funny. The Tigers very appropriately owned 1.5% chance of being a top stack on the slate, 1.5% ownership share. So my feeling here is I don't really want to be stacking up the Tigers. If there was a bunch of stud pitching options on the slate, we do have the Tigers with a 9.1% chance of being a top value stack. So I would say that, like, hey, maybe you want to stack the Tigers to play Jacob deGrom and Max Scherzer together or something like that. But we don't have those options on today's slate when Robbie Ray is picking up a ton of ownership. So what are we doing? We're saving money with the Tigers to get to a bunch of Robbie Ray and Tyler Glass now. That's not necessarily what I think is the most optimal lineup builds for tonight. So I'm fine with skipping on the Tigers. And on the other side with Eric Lauer, never a pitcher that's really all enthralling from a fantasy perspective. So it's a game, not much interest on either side. And
I'll tell you this, it just kind of shows where baseball is right now. You have a game at Miller Park between Matthew Boyd and Eric Lauer, and the over-under is 7.
Yeah, I mean, the offenses score. The offenses are bad, but the other thing too, I mean, Matthew Boyd isn't that terrible.
I understand.
His outlook is so bizarre to me. I don't know what to make of Matthew Boyd either, just because he's so much different of a pitcher this year than he was 2 years ago. The strikeout numbers are wildly different. If you look at Matthew Boyd in previous years, he's been a guy who's really high walks, really high strikeouts, but then also gave up a bunch of runs. So it was a thing where it's like, hey, you're playing Russian roulette and rolling the dice with Matthew Boyd. Are you going to get the bad start where he goes 3 innings and gives up 7 runs and gets the quick hook? Or are you going to get the Matthew Boyd who pitches 8 innings, strikes out 10 hitters, and just lights out from a fantasy perspective? This year, he's just been pretty steady without much upside. His strikeout rate, 19.7%, well below his career average. Compare this to 2 years ago, his last full season in the big leagues before we had the shortened season last year. He had a 30.2% strikeout rate. Now he's striking out 19.7% of the hitters he faces. But then the difference from a run allowance perspective is he had a 4.56 ERA that year. This year, he has this year is 3.43 ERA, 3.68 expected ERA. So we have a guy who's throwing more strikes. He's keeping the ball in play, and that's making him more consistent as a pitcher. But it's also really handcuffed his fantasy upside because he's just not generating swing and misses at the same rate.
He's the opposite of Andrew Heaney now, and we'll get to Heaney and the Angels a little bit later here. Padres, Cubs, we got to fly today because we got 14 games to discuss. Ryan Weathers, and this is where the Padres, they just wasted all these pitchers. You look at the numbers, he's got a 1.31 ERA, but has maxed out at 78 pitches. He did that his last outing, still only went 4 innings. So even if the Padres score 14 runs, you don't know if you're getting a win out of Ryan Weathers with the way they've handled him, as well as Dinelson Lamet. And going up against a Cubs lineup that finally had a little success at Wrigley Field yesterday. What jumps out did you hear about? I mean, Ryan Weathers, he's almost unplayable just because there's no upside.
Yeah, so I mean, this is one that I think we'd save some time on. The Ryan Weathers probably not going to work very deep into the game, but he's probably going to be effective when he's on the mound. And then the Padres have a really good bullpen behind him. So this is probably going to be a kind of cobbled together bullpen game. They'll get a few innings out of Weathers at the top of the game, but he's really been limited ever since he had that game earlier in the season where he pitched. I can't remember who it was he was going against, but it was a slate where I liked him. He was fairly popular. The trainers came out to visit him 2 pitches into the game. Then you start to go, oh no, this is going to be an issue. And then his velocity was way down. They pulled him after the first inning. And ever since then, they've been pretty cautious with pitch count. They haven't let him work very deep into games, but this is going to be a game where they're going to let the bullpen fill in the innings behind Weathers. Weathers himself, decent enough pitcher. Padres have a great bullpen, so nothing to see from a pitching perspective from the Padres. And then also all that bullpen strong enough that you don't really want to roster the Cubs either.
Offensively, Padres going up against Kyle Hendricks, always hittable.
Yeah, I have been making a habit of stacking against Kyle Hendricks this year, and he's finally not popular anymore. He was somebody who early in the season, there were so many slates where Kyle Hendricks was chalk, especially one earlier in the year against the Padres where Kyle Hendricks was like 37% owned or something like that and just absolutely got his face kicked in. We look at the numbers for Kyle Hendricks, a guy who's never had great stuff, and now 87.2 average fastball velocities over the age of 30, 4.63 ERA, 4.84 expected ERA. The field isn't rostering Kyle Hendricks anymore like they were earlier in the year, but still not stacking against him. So we have sub 2% ownership on the Padres as a team. They are a little expensive to pay up for, which is not all that surprising when you consider all the firepower in the Padres offense. However, I don't think there's all much opportunity cost to rostering a team like the Padres today when, we've talked about how weak the starting pitchers are, and there is no Jacob deGrom that we're sacrificing playing by stacking up the Padres. So less than 2% ownership on the Padres as a stack against Kyle Hendricks, who is pitching below replacement level this year. I think this is a contrarian offense to roster.
That value column on the top stack tool, not as vital today as it often is. Our show is sponsored by PrizePicks, who's offering the simplest fantasy game on the market. Say goodbye to sharks, lineup optimizers, mass multi-entry. Simply pick 2, 3, 4, or 5 players available on the board to go over or under their projected score. Simple. Correctly selecting a 5-player lineup can net you up to 10 times the entry fee. And you could play NFL, NBA, esports. PrizePicks has it all. And you could combine your picks across all sports as well. You want to get in on some NHL playoffs over-unders and then what's going to happen tonight with LeBron James. Boom. You can bet it all and throw Ronald Acuna in there as well. Download it on the mobile app in the App Store or on Google Play today. Again, PrizePicks, and make your first deposit to receive an instant deposit match of up to $100 when you use promo code Awesemo. Simplify daily fantasy with PrizePicks today. And we got to get some prop bets on what's the next stupid thing a fan is going to do during these NBA playoffs. We've seen popcorn, water bottle, a guy run on the court, which that was kind of new last night.
I'm gonna say try to trip a player by peeing off the balcony onto the court, and just try to see a player slip and fall on it.
That would be an impressive stream if you could get it there.
Listen, you asked me to predict it. That's my call. I don't know what kind of odds I could get on it, but that's my prediction.
Austin Powers is going to have to be at the game to pull off something like that. Let's get to Boston, Houston. Garrett Richards. I feel like he's always pitching when we do the show together. Luis Garcia has the start for the Houston Astros here. What if anything jumps out to you? One of the higher over-unders, I'll say, for this game. 9 runs on the board in Houston.
Yeah, so the field is definitely there. Houston, one of the more popular offense on the slate, although it's relative. They have a 6.4% projected ownership as a team, which does make them one of the most popular teams on the slate when it's this many games. So to me, I don't really think there's all that much to see from the Houston side, even though Garrett Richards has been up and down this year. On the Boston side of the game, also an offense that's about appropriately owned, 5% chance being a top stack, 5% ownership as a team. Luis Garcia, one thing that's been interesting with him from a pricing perspective is he's not worked deep into very many games this year, but every single slate on Draftkings, he's gotten priced up generally fairly substantially. So he's 8,300 on Draftkings today. Fanduel, Luis Garcia is, I think, also the same price, 8,100 on Fanduel. But looking through some of the pitch counts for Garcia, he has, I'm just going to make sure I have it correct. It would help if there was less Garcias. It doesn't help to just do a.
There's 3 Luis Garcias.
Yeah,
anyone who's like moving things around on Excel sheets, it's not the fun name to have.
He's only worked deeper than 5 innings once the entire season. It was his last start, and it was against the Dodgers. That's very impressive, and had a big fantasy game that time out. But considering what we've seen from him over the course of the season, Boston still is a good offense, and it's hard for me to expect that Luis Garcia is going to continue to have a ton of success from a fantasy perspective. He's only going to pitch 5 innings. So he scored over 20 fantasy points in each of his last 2 starts, but that was the only time they had done it since opening day. So more often than not, Luis Garcia is a guy who does a pretty good job limiting damage, but when he's only working 4 or 5 innings in games, it's hard to expect him to put up, substantial fantasy numbers. More often than not, he's going to be a guy who scores 15, 16 fantasy points, which is okay. He's often not going to kill you, but he's probably not going to win you a tournament. And on a slate of this size, I'm fine with leaving him out of the player pool, although he's effective enough that the Red Sox aren't a priority either. And
find some more of those high variance guys on this slate, and we could find them here. Brady Singer might be a guy that has a little bit of upside for the Kansas City Royals going up against Pittsburgh. I know Will Crow's pitching for Pittsburgh, and when I was running stuff this morning and I try to hunt for homers a little bit, I got a ton of Royal stacks coming up, and based on the top stacks tool, I'm not alone. Yeah, so I'll start with Brady Singer because I think there's merit to both sides of the Royals game today. So Brady Singer does have a 4.91 ERA, but he's been pretty unlucky. So he has a 3.43 expected ERA, 3.66 FIP, and there's strikeout numbers there too. He doesn't throw the most strikes in the world, but still 23.1% strikeout rate. That's acceptable. Like I said, that the walk rate 9%, that's maybe a little bit of an issue, but the Pirates present such a favorable matchup for pitching that I think that Brady Singer, honestly, were really weak for pitching options. Pittsburgh 82 WRC plus against right-handed pitching. They strike out 23.2% of the time. So Brady Singer, to me, is one of the pitchers who, oddly, I feel most confident in, just given the matchup and some of the underlying numbers for Singer. Not somebody I think we need to consider on FanDuel for a single pitcher site, but DraftKings only 6,900, and also Brady Singer, I think going pretty underowned, only 8% projected ownership. Given the matchup, I think he's somebody to come overweight to the field on. And I know when I was building this morning, I didn't end up with any Brady Singer. Oh, a little bit. I got 1 out of 100 lineups, but yeah, maybe a guy you got to kind of wedge your way into a little bit, but it makes sense. You throw the ERA out, you have some of the underlying numbers there, and Pirates maybe aren't the worst lineup in baseball, but they're close. Yeah, they are. The worst is probably the Tigers, but the Pirates. Let's give them the honorary title of worst offense in the National League. So they still have something to hang their hat on, and that's one of the reasons I think it makes sense to get to Brady Singer. As for the Royals side, sure. Here's what makes them an interesting talking point. It is a good spot for them going up against Will Crow, but like you said, the field is there, and if you just run the optimizer uninhibited, it's going to get you to a lot of Royals for that reason.
but this is another team that's going wildly overowned. So we have the Royals with projected 11.4% ownership share. So the only team on the slate that's picking up more ownership than the Royals is the Minnesota Twins, and both of them very negatively leveraged. We have the Twins with a 4% chance to be the top stack compared to the 11% ownership share. So for sure, it's a good spot for the Royals, but it's another one where, once again, I don't think that the ownership is proper considering their actual odds of being top scoring team of the slate. Something else to consider, Adalberto Mondesi just came back from injury and was starting to look pretty good. Got hurt yesterday. He must have just the weakest hamstrings in the world, because he's missed the entire start of the season with a hamstring injury, comes back, plays a few games, hamstring tightness, leaves last games early. I assume he's not going to play tonight. Although supposedly the injury was not believed to be serious, but even with that said, they're going to be cautious with him. I expect he's going to be held out. And Tyler did put in the he did put in for us in our personal chat here that he does not have the strongest quads either. So yes, that's his lower body. He's built like one of those bodybuilders.
Tyler's giving him credit. Tyler wrote that either he's the weakest hamstrings or the strongest quads.
So is it just an imbalance?
That might be it. That might be it.
He just has really front-loaded legs. Like, you look at him and just from the front, he's built like a horse, and then behind it's like me or something like that with skinny legs.
It's like the Yoenis Cespedes thing, He can squat 700 pounds, but can't run the bases for more than 2 weeks without going down.
Okay, yeah. Here we got Tyler saying that's what causes a tear, one being stronger normally. Which, okay, look, I didn't know the overall dynamics of the
that's why all these guys, they hurt their obliques now, because they actually have abs. They didn't have abs 30, 40 years ago.
No, there was no
beers after the game.
Yeah, there was no oblique injury to be had for Babe Ruth. What happened with Babe Ruth is he would eat too many hot dogs and he'd get indigestion and get sent to the hospital. Which
you
is
ever
a
hurt
true
your
story.
oblique? You have a lot of ab injuries in your history, Greg, with the Fire 6-pack?
From golf, I've had oblique injuries, but other than that, I like slept funny on my neck the other day. Like, I guess it's like old man injuries now.
That's kind of where we're all at. Let's get to Texas, Colorado. I mean, it's interesting. It's Coors Field, and yet the over/under is under 10 at 9.5. Texas, a better offense than we expected this season. You have some decent pitching, Dane Dunning for Texas, and then German Marquez for the Colorado Rockies. I'll just ask, why do you think the over/under is so low on this game, and why is this not the typical Coors Field game where you got to be pounding one of these offenses?
Yeah, I mean, for starters, probably because the Rockies' offense sucks. But I mean, it is still Coors Field. The Rockies, actually, I'm going to take back what I said about the Pirates. The Rockies have the worst have the worst offense in the National League. The Rockies have a 64 WRC plus against right-handed pitching. The Rangers a 94 WRC plus against right-handed pitching. And for reference on why that doesn't look terrible, but the Rangers had a top five offense against right-handed pitching by WRC plus just 2 weeks ago. So it's been a pretty steep decline for them. So neither of these offenses are particularly good. German Marquez also, I tend to think, is a fairly decent starting pitcher. But yeah, it does look to be a pretty low total. It's still a Coors Field game, so I'd want to get exposure to the offense if you're playing mass entries, just because the game's being played at Coors Field. And there isn't a ton of ownership going to this game relative to a Coors Field game. If you look at our top stacks, so it actually doesn't really bear that out. It's not in love with either side of the game. We have the Rangers 7.1% chance of being a top stack. The Rockies just a 4.9% chance. But I'm going to get to both sides of this game just really because it's Coors Field.
You have upside, right? And this might not be a game where you're hoping a team goes out and hits 5 home runs. This might be a game where you're actually looking to play some pepper and see the ball in play. And you get a ton of doubles and triples at Coors Field if you're able to get the ball into those big gaps that they have there. I mean, that's kind of the play, that things go off the rail early for one of these pitchers, and then it becomes a Coors Field special, if not a Blake Street Bombers special.
Yeah, and then, I mean, getting to the Rockies, if I had to choose a preference on both these sides of the game, I'm going to go towards the Rockies just because of the low ownership. For a Coors Field game, and it's always funny when this happens where I look at a team and I just poo-poo them and say, the Rockies probably have the worst offense in the National League. And then it's like, yeah, but they're Coors Field and they're projecting for 2.5% ownership as a team. And to me, I mean, Coors Field, anybody becomes viable really at Coors Field. So just given how low the ownership is, I want to get there above the field when it's only 2.5%.
And just quickly on Marquez, one thing that's been odd for him this year, he's been walking a lot of batters, but was much improved in that area his last time out. I believe that was a start against the Mets. So we'll see how that bears out for Marquez today. Look, you have a big night. We want to know about it, and tell everyone else that Awesemo is where you're at. So you can download the Awesemo avatar from awesemo.com/avatar. It strikes fear into the heart again, everyone you're up against in the tournament. So it'll help you out there. And look, you win stuff. If you place in the top 3 of a contest with over 5,000 contestants, tweet the win to the Awesemo HOF account, and you win a free month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. And that's a pretty nice way to go. I think I got there. I finished 3rd in the Nets Celtics showdown on Saturday, but I'm not sure if there were 5,000. It was like right around there. I should have gone, given my Hall of Fame speech, man. I should have made that happen. But I'll tell you what, I don't know jack squat about the NBA. I just go in to Awesemo, the Fantasy Cruncher, run some lineups, throw them in. I don't have to do anything because I don't know anything, and it hit a little bit. So Awesemo, baby.
There you go. That's the speech. It was just the thumbs up. It was the Phil Mickelson thumbs up.
Well, I wanted to have more bitterness in it. I guess I'm just bitter toward baseball because I like to think I know baseball, and it's been a grind, man. We're hitting that point of the year now where it's June, and it's like, all right, you're gonna have more days where you lose than win, and you hope to have some big pops, and you gotta hang with them.
Yay! Listen, we're gonna get your. I think we should just have Pete in the Hall of Fame every day. Every day gets inducted.
I'm fine with that. I mean, I'll take the money. Mets, Diamondbacks, Marcus Stroman, Caleb Smith is the matchup there. We saw Jacob deGrom a night ago. I mean, he's just ridiculous, throwing 102 miles per hour, blowing everybody away, and then they're taking him out at 70 pitches for whatever reason. But, there are some strikeouts a little bit in this Diamondbacks lineup. Marcus Stroman, not a huge strikeout guy. It's open-ended. What jumps out to you, Mets, Diamondbacks tonight?
Listen, we're making pretty good time here. We have, 14 minutes left. So I want to ask you, what happened I was so confused by the DeGrom thing last night, not just because they took him out at 70 pitches. Like if he's on a pitch count because he's come back from injury, they're being cautious with him. All right, all is well and good. Why have him bat in the top of the 7th inning to take him out in the bottom of the 7th? If injury risk is the concern, what is the purpose of having him hit when you know he's not going to pitch in the bottom of the inning?
No idea. I wasn't watching the game terribly closely because I was working at the time, but I was following along, and look, he's hitting like 450, so he's one of their best hitters, and he had another RBI single yesterday. Everything they're doing with DeGrom is just bizarre to me. Like DeGrom, he had no hit perfect game stuff last night. He almost always does, but he retired the first 13 Diamondbacks he faced. Personally, I'm watching the Islanders game. They went in overtime, and I flip over the Mets. First pitch I see is hit into center field for a single. So sorry, Jake. But they were going to take him out even if he had a perfect game at 70 pitches. Like he's hurt then. Either he's hurt or he's not. But this is something next time DeGrom pitches, it's going to be a major talking point and decision for DFS because what is he going to max out at 85 pitches? Now, he might be capable of giving you 8 innings with the way he's going. He went 6 on 70 pitches last night. But it's just bizarre. He's clearly not healthy if they're limiting him to this degree, even when his starts are easy. And they have been easy the last 2 times out.
And that's the part I don't understand, though, is if you're that concerned about his health, you don't think he's 100%, you want to limit him, why are you giving him an extra at bat? Like, what good is going to come of that? They've already had Taijuan Walker's gotten hurt hitting this year. Mm-hmm. Jack Flaherty got hurt hitting last night. Mm-hmm. Like, is this... And the other thing also is somebody had said to me, well, he's one of the best hitters on the Mets, which fine as, like, yes, he's had very good numbers this year, but it also, for his career, he's a 34 WRC plus. He's not going to be better than any of the guys off the bench, and certainly not something that would be worth risking him hitting, especially not when the Mets were up. They ended up finished that inning up 5-0, but they were up 3-0 at the time. There's no purpose in having DeGrom hit there if he's about to come out. So I don't know. I was I was concerned that maybe he tweaked something while he was hitting in that at bat, because it's a very bizarre time to have him hit if you're going to take him
I
out
don't
right
think so,
after.
because they did the same thing the previous start. They took him out at 60 pitches the last time out. So it's consistent with what they're doing. I don't think necessarily anything happens, but clearly, something's wrong. They've been really sketchy with this whole right side tightness thing. It clearly looked like his back was bothering him. I mean, whatever's going on with him, he's still shoving and has been an absolute ace for them this year. But now, just get back to the game tonight. Stroman, Caleb Smith. What's on the table, if anything, in this game? I guess it depends too. Always interesting if they had the dome open. The ball was flying out last night.
Yeah. So one thing with Stroman, I think he's a very good pitcher. Most people think he's a very good pitcher, but he's just not a fantasy friendly pitcher with his game. A lot of ground balls, pitches to contact, finds a lot of success. Almost every single Marcus Stroman start, I'm not rostering Stroman, but I'm also not going to want to stack against him either. Also, the Diamondbacks don't have a great offense in their own right, but you look at the strikeout numbers for Stroman for his career, only 19.6% strikeout rate this year, the exact same number as career, 19.6%. The only full season he's had over 19.6%. He had his rookie year. He had an over 20% strikeout rate. But beyond that, this guy throws a lot of strikes, generates a lot of ground balls, pitches to contact. He's going to be successful on the mound. We've always seen him outperform his peripheral stats this year, 2.45 ERA, 3.87 expected ERA. But we look at some of the previous numbers for him. He's always outperforming those numbers. So I don't expect any kind of regression. It's really just the case of not a fantasy-friendly pitcher because of the lack of strikeouts.
All right, Angels, Giants in San Francisco. This is an interesting pitching matchup. Alex Wood walks in with his 2.44 ERA, but it's Andrew Heaney that I think we got to focus on here. Maybe there's no pitcher in baseball right now that has a wider disparity between how good they are in real life versus how good they are in fantasy, right? You're just talking about Marcus Stroman, and he's on the other end of this spectrum where he's good in real life, not so much in fantasy. And Andrew Heaney, he's got 3 starts where he's put up over 30 Draftkings points this year. So he is a guy you could throw in there and try to get some big time upside in a tournament.
Yeah, and I think the key here to Heaney is just going to be keeping an eye on what his ownership is. Right now, we have him projected for sub 20% ownership on DraftKings. Heaney on Fanduel is projected for only 8% ownership, which to me is crazy at a 6,700 price tag. You can't feel confident in Heaney given overall his ERA this year. And like you said, the range of outcomes is immense here because he's a guy who gives up a lot of runs from a real life perspective. But if you have a game where he's pitching okay, he's going to generate a lot of fantasy points because the strikeout numbers are massive for him. He's a 29.1% strikeout rate. That leads to 11.08 strikeouts per 9 innings. So the ERA for Heaney is all the way up to 5.24. The underlying numbers are a little bit better, 4.56 expected ERA. It's also a tough matchup against an unsuspectingly strong Giants offense. But I mean, even with that in mind, it's hard for me to ignore the strikeout stuff for Heaney and just the overall low ownership. FanDuel, the really cheap price, I think that he's a good way to differentiate. DraftKings, just because the overall weak pitching options on the slate, I think he's a good SP2. So he needs somebody who I think by necessity is going to be in my player pool because of that upside.
I want to get into the Giants a little bit. Now, he's a guy with high variance. So maybe, you do have a Giants stack mixed in here on a night like tonight, especially if Heaney's ownership is going to be as high as it is. Now, the last few times I've stacked the Giants, they switch a lot of players in and out in the middle of the game. They're going up against a lefty and Heaney. How much does that affect whether or not you're going to take a chance on an offense? Because, look, you take Wilmer Flores, say, tonight, who mashes lefties his whole career, and then you're looking in the 6th inning, they score a bunch of runs, and Flores is out of the game. It's frustrating.
Yeah, and so here's how I would approach it. If they're going to score a bunch of runs, the stack's probably going to do okay anyway, right? So it could be, Darren Ruff in there, whoever else it is that they put in there. But you're right, they do have a lot of nights where they go out and they score 11 runs. One of the most frustrating nights I ever remember having in DFS is I had a Giant stack, I think this was last season actually, where the team ends up scoring 10 runs through 2 innings and Darren Ruff got pinch hit for in the 2nd inning. And was like a core part of my Giant stacks that day. And so, yeah, I agree with you. But here's the way I think that overall you approach it. Don't use those guys as one-offs who are the guys that often get pinch hit for. In terms of a stack, I don't mind it as much. There's always a little bit of risk, except, that's something that's also a little bit commonplace in today's day and age is that a lot of teams do end up pinch hitting, especially in the National League games. But even with that aside, I'm fine with the Giants as a stack just through the variance of Andrew Heaney. I think this is a game we want to play both sides of. Heaney to me looks underowned, and the Giants as a stack look underowned. The Giants are picking up less than 2% ownership, and then Heaney himself only 8% on DraftKings, 8% on Fanduel, 17% on DraftKings. I want to be overweight to both sides.
How about Alex Wood?
Yeah, so Alex Wood is somebody who, bringing up his numbers now really quick, he has had really odd trends with his velocity, whereas he's been a guy the last few years has had a lot more success at the start of seasons than at the end of seasons. And once again, we're seeing him off to a strong start. He has a 2.44 ERA, a 3.43 expected ERA.
It was lower.
Yeah, except it's, overall the numbers are still strong for him. Mm-hmm. But we see this all the time where he starts to fade in the second half of his career. And so as long as it's the first half of the season, I don't mind targeting Wood, but he's somebody who in the second half of the season, I'm going to want to start stacking against him. For now, I'm fine with Wood as a DFS option, but let's see. Let me bring up his splits for his career, first and second half of the season. He has, so for his career, first half of the season, Alex Wood, and this is a pretty big sample size here, right? We're looking at, the last 8-9 years. 3.13 FIP in the first half of the season for Alex Wood. Second half of the season, 3.99 FIP. And then also, if you look at his velocity numbers, I think his velocity is like 1.5 miles per hour higher on average in the first half of the season, the second half of the season. So it does look like fatigue is just an issue here. And we've seen different things. Remember when he was with the Dodgers, they started to try to tinker with just putting him on the disabled list for long stretches of time in the middle of the season, just to try to keep him fresh. But even that didn't appear to be all that successful for him. He's just a guy who wears as the season goes on. So him, I think he's worth being in the player pool, not at a super high clip. Still a fairly difficult matchup against the Angels. We only have him with a 13% chance to be a top pitcher on the slate. But still, if you roster him somewhere around 10, 15%, I don't have an issue with that with Alex Wood tonight, just given how scarce the pitching options are.
Well, we're not in the second half of the season yet, but, we're into June and, maybe you started to see some slippages last time out, gave up more than 2 runs in a start for the first time all year, 3 home runs allowed to the Dodgers, better offense probably than the Angels are throwing out there, but something to keep in mind as well. Remember, you can stay up to date on the latest MLB DFS news with our @Awesemo MLB handle. Our guy News God will be delivering starting lineup confirmations and any injury updates, late scratches. I mean, the worst thing that can happen is a pitcher that you're big on getting scratched right before. Got to be up on it. So make sure you follow @Awesemo MLB. You can check out News God's Twitter handle as well @NewsGod_DFS. Remember, like and subscribe here in our YouTube channel so you can keep up with our shows, DFS offers, giveaways, and much, much more. And of course, pop that notification button as well so you know when we do go live. Chris Bassitt seems to be like chronically underowned. He's not a very popular pitcher again tonight, going up against Seattle and Marco Gonzalez.
Yeah, so Chris Bassitt, I don't think there's been there was like a 2 or 3 game slate where I think he ended up being popular just because there weren't any other options. But yeah, once again, Chris Bassitt not picking up a whole bunch of ownership. Although it's hard for me to really get behind him at a 9,100 price tag. It's not to say he hasn't been successful this year, and the matchup against the Mariners certainly isn't a bad one. But for whatever reason, I find it hard to totally buy into Chris Bassitt as being a top of the rotation starter and somebody who warrants that kind of price tag. The numbers do look good this year. Is a 3.21 ERA, 2.91 expected ERA. His strikeouts are up a little bit this year, 26.1% strikeout rate. But I don't know, maybe it's bias on my part that I shouldn't have, but we've seen him just be a average to below average starter for so long in the big leagues that I don't buy that he is all of a sudden this top of the rotation starter and he's getting priced like one. And if you look at all of the other options that we have on the slate tonight in that price range, even though they aren't some of the best options in the world, I still prefer Tyler Glasnow, Aaron Nola, Sonny Gray, Alex Wood. All these guys that are priced around Andrew Heaney, I think are all these guys that are priced around Chris Bassitt. I view all of them as superior options for the slate. And with it being 14 games, you can't really roster everybody. So he's somebody who didn't make the cut in my initial build.
And then the Oakland A's, I feel like they always end up being one of the positive leverage teams as they go up against Marco Gonzalez.
Yeah, so Marco Gonzalez is a guy who I'm kind of surprised that he's still sticking around in the big leagues. There's a lot of guys like this who I feel like a more extreme case would be like a Matt Harvey, where somebody like, hey, had a little bit of name recognition, found some success, and then, just kind of stuck around forever. But he's just been a guy who, for a lot of his career, he's eaten up innings, except still this year. I mean, a 5.4 ERA, 7.43 expected ERA. And he's been, middle of the road pitcher for a really long time. I don't think there's any real significant upside there. And Oakland, nobody's rostering Oakland today. They only have a 1.5% ownership share. So given how much Marco Gonzalez has struggled this year, if you look at the Zips projections for the rest of the year, they have him with an ERA around 4.5 for the rest of the year. And the numbers for Marco Gonzalez, just read what I said before, 5.4 ERA, 7.43 expected ERA. The strikeout stuff hasn't been there. He's only striking out 19% of the hitters he faces. He's also had command issues. He's walking 9.1% of the hitters. To me, Marco Gonzalez as a pitcher doesn't look like he belongs in a big league rotation right now, but Mariners still trotting him out there to really just get hit hard every time. A's picking up no ownership as it seemed to be overweight to the field on.
One more game to go. John Gant, and we believe it'll be David Price on the hill for the Dodgers against the Cardinals. We kind of know the deal with Gant. He can get you some strikeouts, but he's going to top out at about 5 innings.
Yeah, and this year has been significantly worse results for John Gant than we've seen in some of the previous seasons. While the ERA itself does look good, you have to look at the underlying numbers here, where maybe I shouldn't say the results haven't been good. The results shouldn't have been good because he has a 1.81 ERA, but a 4.97 expected ERA, a 4.06 xFIP. So the key here with John Gant has just been really lucky sequencing. He's letting guys get on base, but they just aren't scoring just based on the hits not getting strung together. So John Gant this year, 85% strand rate. That's not going to continue. That's probably going to be something in the neighborhood of 70%. And that's why he really should be a guy who has an ERA in the mid to high 4 range, looking at his underlying numbers and his projections for the rest of the season. So John Gant, I think that he's a pitcher to stack up a little bit against with the Dodgers. We do have the Dodgers with the 3rd best chance of the day to be a top scoring team on the slate. So I would look past John Gant's ERA this year, look at the underlying numbers that suggest he hasn't been a good pitcher.
All right, we're out of time. As we talked about this slate, the pitching's a little wonky. There's not one guy to pay up for and go nuts for, though. Tyler Glasnow is one that you like. And as far as the stacks goes, it sounds like you'll be rooting against the Twins and Royals, and that'll probably decide your night.
Yeah, so we have, just to recap that, we have the Royals, 4.3% chance to be a top stack, 11% ownership share. Twins, 9% chance to be a top stack, 16% ownership share. So both those teams look wildly overowned. And then some of the teams that have some of the more positive leverage scores, Colorado Rockies, the Oakland A's, who we just talked about, the Padres, mentioned them earlier. Those to me are the 3 best stacks relative to ownership right now, the A's, the Rockies, and the Padres.
Well, a loaded Tuesday night, 14 games on the slate. Best of luck to all of you. And remember, be sure to check out Awesemo.com. Get in all the projections. We do have free ownership for Major League Baseball today on the site. Again, Awesemo.com. PGA Strategy Show is coming up an hour from now on our YouTube channel. MLB Deeper Dive is at 3 Eastern. And then the tip-off and all of your NBA playoff info begins at 4:30 Eastern. Our thanks to PrizePicks for Greg Ehrenberg, our producer Tyler. I'm PeteyMac. Happy stacking.